tell you an incident that happened on the set. The scene in Red Square where we had 200 extras, and this came back to haunt me. I said, I want real Russian-looking people. So they said, well, it's hard to find that many Russians. And I said, well, expand a little bit. So they went out and they got Ukrainians, they got Georgians, they got Muscovites, they got Kazakhstanis. We got on the set, they're all together in a giant hot soundstage with hot lights on them and getting uncomfortable for most of the day. And Kalugin came onto the set, and I was talking to him, and one of the people in the crowd goes, "Oh my God, that man killed my father."
In the 1950s, Oleg Kalugin was a student at Columbia University. A New York Times puff piece describes him as a real personality kid, fluent in English, slim, and jaunty. In the photo, his smile is toothy and wide. His wife, a math teacher, was waiting for him, back home in Leningrad. Kalugin was studying journalism, and liked jazz and cinema. But it was all a cover. He was a KGB spy. He would spend the next decade rising in the ranks, posing as a journalist at the United Nations, and later heading up the Soviet Union's embassy in Washington, D.C., while undercover as a press officer. By 40, Kalugin was the KGB's youngest major general, and his colleagues predicted he might someday lead the organization. But in the 1980s, Kalugin and the KGB had a falling out. He came out publicly against the organization. He was stripped of his medals and rank. He narrowly avoided going to prison. And by 1995, he was on that hot, crowded set in Los Angeles because he was filming a video game. That was Spycraft, the great game. And Kalugin wasn't the only Cold War heavy hitter involved.
What drives this game is reality. We asked the men who ran the two largest spy agencies in the world, what keeps you awake at night?
His co-star was soldier, spy, and ex-CIA director William Colby, the man who had run the CIA's wartime operations in Vietnam, and who also, like Kalugin, had been ostracized by the agency he devoted his life to.
I was shocked, first of all, when they told me that Colby and Kalugin are going to work together. I mean, oh my God, you've got the two most stealth figures of the entire Cold War, and they're going to work together?
This is the story of Spycraft, the most ambitious, weirdest, and complicated full-motion video game ever created. A ripped from the headlines, pulpy spy adventure, once described by the New York Times as Tom Clancy meets Myst. It starred Hollywood actors and pushed computers to their limits. And then it was forgotten. But the story of Spycraft is about more than a game. It's about the two notorious figures who came together to make it. An unlikely partnership that represented belief in a new world order. Peace between the United States and Russia.
From the ashes of the Cold War rises a new threat to world order.
The creators of Spycraft called the game an interactive, but it's better known today as a full-motion video game. FMVs are essentially choose-your-own-adventure films, and they were seen as the logical evolution of games, which had mostly been considered children's entertainment. This particular FMV was a $3 million big swing from the now notorious former Activision CEO, Bobby Kotick, who was just beginning his multi-decade reign at the company. Spycraft had more in common with contemporary spy films than other video games, and its plot beats could have been pulled from a newspaper. In it, Russia and the United States are on the verge of permanent nuclear disarmament.
This day is a day of great joy.
But some people don't want that to happen. As fresh CIA recruit Thorn, the player travels the globe, fighting assassins and trying to stop the sale of a nuclear core that threatens to destroy the world's fragile peace.
The game is over, and you lose.
Spycraft is impressive for its scope and production value, but one of its major marketing points was the involvement of Oleg Kalugin and William Colby, two of the most decorated and detested Cold Warriors of their time.
My next door neighbor, who's Russian, has a mother, and I told her about this. This was like 15, 20 years ago. And I said, what do you think? Sorry, it's just still so funny to me. I said, what do you think about Oleg Kalugin doing this video game? And she looked me straight in the eyes and said, he's a traitor and should be killed.
Oleg Kalugin was the quintessential spy. In his book, Spy Master: My 32 Years in Intelligence and Espionage Against the West, Kalugin reflects on his career in seemingly candid detail, including the incident that launched it all, his recruitment of a rocket engineer that the KGB called Cook.
He pulled out his pièce de résistance, a test tube containing a black jelly, a sample of top-secret US solid rocket fuel. I fingered the test tube. My fellow officer and I sat there in silence, holding our breath as we half expected a squad of FBI agents to burst through the door.
But the crowning achievement of his early career came during his time in Washington, D.C. While posing as a press agent at the Soviet embassy, Kalugin pulled off what the New York Times called one of the most damaging spy operations in American history. He orchestrated a complex series of dead drops that allowed John Walker, a Navy officer turned double agent, to give countless classified documents to the KGB.
First, there were documents on the movement and activity of the Atlantic Fleet. Then, there was information that enabled us to break the US codes. What amazed us was how easy it was for Walker to simply stuff top-secret documents in his clothes or briefcase and walk out of the communications center of such a crucial American naval base. After his arrest, Walker would remark that Kmart has better security than the Navy.
Kalugin brags about the ease with which he recruited spies like Walker from the US intelligence community. But at other times, he diminishes his role.
In all my years in the KGB, I have only once been involved in what we call in the business a wet job, an assassination. It occurred in 1978, and though I didn't have a pivotal role in the killing, I nevertheless did not try to talk my superiors out of the plot to kill the Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov.
In 1978, Markov was stabbed with a poison umbrella tip in London by an agent of the Bulgarian Secret Service. He was hospitalized and died 4 days later. Kalugin's work would make him the smirking nemesis in any other American spy story. But in Spycraft, he's something more complicated.
He's a traitor and should be killed. So I was like, ha ha! Oh, she was dead serious. She thought him just like that, as a traitor, and he should be killed.
On the other side of the Iron Curtain was William Colby. A young Colby joined the CIA after serving as an OSS officer in World War II. He worked in a fractured, recovering Europe, setting up clandestine paramilitary networks in Finland and Norway as a bulwark against a feared Soviet invasion.
As the danger of Stalin's expansion, that kind of society seemed to be threatening to sweep around and cover more of the world, people were very concerned that they were faced with a new totalitarianism. And consequently, we developed a CIA in order to conduct the subversive level of the struggle.
The Italian election campaign at the crisis. Premier De Gasperi calls for votes to defend freedom and beat communism, and he champions America's Marshall Plan.
In Rome, Colby's family enjoyed a charmed life, living across the street from the Colosseum and exploring the ancient Roman forums, unaware that their father was only pretending to work for the State Department. Colby's real assignment was to meddle in Italy's elections and prop up anti-communist parties. Later, he was stationed in Saigon, where he was responsible for the Phoenix program. It was an American-run, Vietnamese-manned counterinsurgency operation that was responsible for the deaths of some 26,000 Vietnamese people.
Well, the first thing I knew about my father was I considered him a hero because I knew he had parachuted into France. So I knew the history, that he was this decorated hero. And I bought that, hook, line, and sinker, and why not? It was a good story. And then he seemed to get involved in things that are a little more questionable. Like in Vietnam, it wasn't just helping out the downtrodden, but I didn't know whether I could trust him or believe in him, because he appeared to be straight with me sometimes, but then other times just, let's not talk about that. It's like when I would ask about something serious, like about a relationship, and he would say, that's your department, friend. As if I had an expertise, a lock on emotions, and could speak about them, but that he didn't have the key to that cabinet. But the cabinet existed, he had a key, he didn't want to use it.
Colby and Kalugin's careers took them out of the field and into the back rooms of espionage, where torture and death were a matter of bureaucracy. On a daily basis, it was paperwork, information gained or traded away for incremental benefits, and a seemingly endless conflict.
Their trajectories are oddly parallel in some key ways.
I'm Maya Vinokur. I teach in the Department of Russian and Slavic Studies at New York University.
By the time they both arrive on the set of Spycraft, they have each gone through this process of disillusionment and being pushed out and being ex-spies.
Kalugin had been called back to Russia in the 1970s, where he continued to work in foreign intelligence. But suspicion and corruption were running rampant in the KGB. KGB head Yuri Andropov had always been an ally to Kalugin, but Andropov's right-hand man and Kalugin's direct boss, Vladimir Kryuchkov, was decidedly not.
In all my years in the KGB, I encountered few as scheming, slippery, and duplicitous as Vladimir Alexandrovich Kryuchkov.
Kryuchkov was a corrupt micromanager who didn't trust anyone he couldn't control through blackmail or bullying. That made Kalugin's rising star a threat.
Although Kryuchkov and I instinctively disliked and mistrusted each other, the more telling split between us arose because he remained implacably suspicious of the West, a diehard ideologue, while I held a pragmatic view of our American and Western opponents.
For hardline elements of the KGB, Kalugin's greatest intelligence coups were starting to be seen as too good to be true. Cook, the spy who had handed Kalugin a vial of rocket fuel and launched his career 2 decades earlier, was now suspected of being a CIA double agent. And so was Kalugin.
The system to which I had devoted my life, the system to which I had been boundlessly loyal, now suspected me of betrayal. I had been sullied by unproven allegations so amorphous that I didn't even know how to fight back. I increasingly began to feel like millions of other Soviets who had been unjustly accused of crimes, though most of them had experienced a far worse fate. In our system, everyone was a suspect, including someone as fanatically loyal as myself. From that day forward, I realized that the system was essentially vicious. As someone once said, the revolution devours its own children.
Kalugin still had an ally in Yuri Andropov. While Cook was sent to Siberia, Kalugin was merely demoted to working in the domestic branch of the KGB.
Instead of spying on America or whoever, I had to look into the domestic problems and ferret out Russians who, by Soviet standards, looked disloyal to the Soviet regime. Who are my enemies? People who do not feel good, who are not happy, who are disgruntled, disenchanted, disillusioned, and my job is to punish them by putting them in jail or psychiatric institutions. I understood pretty well why the Soviets were unhappy.
When Andropov died in 1984, Kalugin's guardian angel was gone. But after a series of ailing and feebled leaders, he had a new reason to be hopeful. The charismatic and comparatively youthful Mikhail Gorbachev took over the party and introduced a concept called glasnost.
Which means, we can talk about stuff now, right? Openness is the way it's usually translated. And notably, the openness was intended for people to be able to speak out about problems with the economy.
Inspired by glasnost, Kalugin began criticizing the KGB from within. He wrote letters to Soviet publications condemning the organization's methods and pursued internal corruption more vigorously. But when he tried to pursue it all the way to high-ranking party bosses, he met resistance. He was demoted and functionally forced out of the KGB. On the day of his retirement, he walked out of Lubyanka and right to the door of the fledgling democratic movement in Russia to offer his services.
Finally, I was free and assaulting the KGB head-on.
According to Reuters, Kalugin was stripped of his medals and pension for actions discrediting the honor and dignity of the service. The KGB wanted to charge him with treason. Instead, Kalugin was elected to the newly formed Congress of People's Deputies and gained immunity from prosecution.
Gorbachev had begun a program of restructuring that was accompanied by glasnost. You were supposed to now be able to clearly say, like, hey, there's graft and corruption going on over here. But then it kind of got out of control, and it started to like shake up the fundaments of the Soviet regime. And over time, it became clear that the Soviet Union could not be reformed. It was going to start collapsing. And that's what began to happen. And so then communist hardliners in the party tried to stage a takeover from Gorbachev's government. And so they waited until Gorbachev was on vacation in Crimea, by the way, which is like where the denouement of spycraft occurs. And then they tried to take over.
This is an NBC News special report. Crisis in Moscow. Now, here is Bryant Gumbel.
Good afternoon. This has been an extraordinary day in the Soviet Union, where Mikhail Gorbachev has been ousted from power. In what appears to have been a bloodless coup, hardliners have seized power.
One of the leaders of the putsch was KGB head Vladimir Khrushchev, Kalugin's despised former boss.
And now Kalugin is out there with the people, seemingly in opposition to his former agency. And I think that's just like a sign of the times, right? Like, this is the extent to which things are falling apart.
5 months later, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. The reformist Boris Yeltsin, who had been president of Soviet Russia, now led the newly democratic country.
He starts in the 90s like very popular, giving vigorous speeches on top of a tank, and by the mid-90s, he's lost a lot of that verve. By the mid-90s, right, like many different segments of Russian society had lost faith in Yeltsin. The economic reforms of the early 90s had proven disastrous for all but a very few people who were greatly enriched by them. These reforms notably were promoted by important American academics, and then they caused massive immiseration and chaos. And that combined with a loosening of kind of like ideological structures. The Soviet Union ends, which means the Soviet project ends, which means like the idea of Soviet socialism now is no more, but then what replaces it? It's not totally clear. So like those factors swirl together, plus then Yeltsin bombs the parliament in 1993, the Russian parliament, because they are like resisting his attempts to secure more executive power for himself. Like the early 90s are very turbulent in Russia, and Yeltsin becomes the face.
Russia is in a very difficult stage today of development. It's undergoing a tremendous transformation.
In 1993, Kalugin sought election to the new Russian parliament, but he didn't anticipate just how disgusted people had become by the reform government's corruption and ineptitude. Despite winning a clear majority in 1990, Kalugin now claimed only 7% of the vote. The country was sliding towards the strongman politics of another former KGB officer, Yeltsin's subordinate, Vladimir Putin.
He even mentioned back then a guy named Putin who worked for them, and he was very down on Putin. He basically thought of him as a thug.
Putin was too small to report to me directly. He was one of 3,000 guys. He was just a gray non-entity walking in the corridors. He was like all subordinates who had no confidence in themselves.
Like people are making predictions like in 95 that if the Yeltsin situation continued to degenerate and the enrichment of oligarchs and the large-scale corruption and so on were allowed to continue, that the only kind of person who could subsequently come to power would be basically a former KGB strongman, and that is indeed what came to pass.
On October 3rd of that year, with a 3-year contract in my pocket, I arrived in the United States as a Russian partner of AT&T. I never thought that my temporary status would transform into a new life. Yes, I felt disillusioned over Russia's progress toward democracy. It is a process that is at once ugly and inspiring. I am sure it will not be completed in my lifetime, but I am equally sure that in the years to come, Russia will be a democratic and increasingly prosperous state.
The next time Kalugin would play a spy would be in Spycraft: The Great Game. He would never return to Russia. William Colby also ascended to the top of the spy world, leaving Vietnam and becoming President Nixon's Director of Central Intelligence in 1973.
My dad became the director at a very difficult time. Vietnam was crumbling. The whole effort to win in Vietnam, much less just to hang on, was going down the tubes. That wasn't a good sign.
Inside the CIA, a catastrophe had been brewing for years. The long, bloody war in Vietnam eroded Americans' trust in the government. Then came the Watergate scandal, which revealed that Nixon wiretapped American journalists with CIA equipment. Nixon resigned, but the agency's biggest scandal was yet to come. Before passing the role to Colby, outgoing CIA Director James Schlesinger had ordered an extensive report. I have ordered all senior operating officials of this agency to report to me immediately on any activities now going on or that have gone on in the past which might be construed to be outside the legislative charter of this agency. As Colby took up his new post as CIA Director in 1973, over 600 pages detailing the CIA's global crimes were dropped in his lap. The report was dubbed the Family Jewels. He locked it in a safe in his office. It detailed how the CIA was spying on Americans, funding domestic propaganda, and committing assassinations worldwide. Inside the CIA and the White House, those aware of the report were increasingly nervous about the damage it could cause. When information from the document leaked to the press in 1974, it was a disaster for the agency. In response, Congress initiated the Church hearings, led by Idaho Senator Frank Church.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to two American journals.
The hearings made headlines as they unearthed details from the Family Jewels. Programs like MKUltra, LSD-fueled mind control experiments, and COINTELPRO, domestic spying on civil rights and anti-war groups, were brought to light.
Was the intent to alter political expression.
We had information on the Vietnam veterans against the war.
You were referring to opening the mail, were you not?
Yes.
And that was against the law, was it not?
Yes.
Perhaps most salacious and destructive to the agency were details of an assassination program, one that had targeted foreign leaders like Fidel Castro.
Does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman.
And the dart itself, when it strikes the target, does the target know that he's been hit and about to die?
And a special one was developed which potentially would be able to enter the target without perception.
It does seem to me that if his first priority had been to keep his job, then maybe he wouldn't have been so forthcoming.
As CIA Director, William Colby testified before the committee 32 times. Though he never wavered in his defense of the agency, he spoke with a level of transparency that shocked the secretive intelligence community and caused an uproar in the White House. Ex-Director Schlesinger told President Ford that Colby was too damned cooperative with the Congress. Only 3 years after obtaining the highest position in American intelligence, William Colby was dismissed by President Ford. Former RNC Chairman George H.W. Bush was chosen to replace him.
And so he's the sacrificial lamb. And he took it.
Colby is a kind of idealist, and in fact, one way of looking at what happened to him is that eventually his personal ethics and ideals clashed so much with what he saw the CIA doing that he conducted himself in such a way that maybe his departure was inevitable.
I think that he was really not broken, but really injured, wounded, hurt, beyond hurt by casting him out. You're out of the club. The secrets of the world are no longer yours to be heard. You're out. You were thrown out.
What drives this game is reality. We asked the men who ran the 2 largest spy agencies in the world, what keeps you awake at night?
First of all, when they told me that Colby and Kalugin are going to work together, I'm going, oh my God, you've got the 2 most stealth figures of the entire Cold War, and they're going to work together?
We've got a situation. We're building the team. You're on it.
I'm Ken Barris. I'm most well known for some of my famous commercials. Then I moved into interactive filmmaking and into long form and into novel writing.
And you are the director of Spycraft?
I'm the director of Spycraft.
The Cold War that kept Colby and Kalugin on opposite sides had ended. They had both been ingloriously removed from their respective intelligence agencies, and they were free to do anything, even make a video game.
When I learned about Oleg Kalugin and William Colby being involved, then I was like, holy shit, this is like actually extremely fascinating and very strange.
The surreality of the occasion didn't escape those working on the project. Actor Kirk Wohler didn't have any scenes with Colby or Kalugin, but he remembers seeing them on set.
It was just fascinating to see those 2 men be across from each other. And they were very nice to each other. Both of them were smiling a lot.
He was a very serious professional. He isn't going to tell me all his secrets. I'm not going to tell him all my secrets. But nonetheless, we can respect each other as decent professionals in difficult, important business for our countries during that time.
I don't think he had a ill feeling with Kalugin. I think it was more of a chess game. And then it's strange to say, there was almost a moral ambivalence that my father projected once in a while. And it was very odd to hear this. I think he knew Kalugin as an adversary, but then as a friendly adversary who they shake hands at the end of the war. Very strange.
I personally don't find it surprising. I think that especially for intelligence officers of that generation, I guess there was always a degree of respect for people on the other side as intelligence professionals, as people that utilized tradecraft.
Our interviewer asked me pointedly, what do you think of Mr. Colby as a former leading figure in US intelligence? It was May 1991 and the KGB still exercised full control of the USSR. Yet my answer was unequivocal and defined. Had I had a choice in my earlier life, I would have gladly worked under Mr. Colby rather than under KGB chairman Kryuchkov.
Some people came up to me saying, aren't you a little worried that you're standing between 2 of the most possibly despised people in the world? And I started thinking about that, and maybe I thought, maybe that wasn't a great idea to pose between the both of them.
In Spycraft, Colby and Kalugin don't have a lot of screen time, but the allure of former spy masters was clearly appealing for the game's marketers. From the box art to magazine articles to mini documentaries promoting the game, Colby and Kalugin's presence is constant.
Kalugin is supposed to be like, this is what's making the Russian component authentic, and Colby is what's making the American CIA component authentic. When they're called upon to be in Spycraft is when they are least spy-like. They're most out in the open, they're most retired from the CIA or the KGB.
In the fiction of Spycraft, Colby comes out of retirement to consult with the player after it's revealed that there's a mole in the CIA. Decades after Colby was removed from the agency, a fact never mentioned in the game.
If they're good, their motivations are personal and invisible.
In his lone scene, Kalugin strolls into the office of a Russian Foreign Intelligence Service agent to give the player a lead, only a couple years after the man himself left Russia and the intelligence world forever.
Oleg Kalugin, this is Thorne of the CIA. Oh, it's very nice to meet you, Thorne.
Oleg Kalugin was surprisingly jovial and nice and like cool. So it wasn't your image of KGB, you know? I hope this doesn't sound wrong, but he just had a sparkle about him. He struck me as interesting.
The one on the left is called Ilya. He used to be called the Hammer.
Oh yes, he was the one who was shot in the head by one of his henchmen over a pair of blue jeans.
That's right, over the pair of blue jeans, can you imagine?
Yes.
Well, the other one is Uzbek.
He's good.
I do not know him.
He's like it's like should be in a Bourne film.
It wasn't lost on other spies that he has this like charismatic quality. And obviously he has media training. And that makes him maybe good for being in spycraft too.
He openly said, you know, he enjoyed doing on-camera work. He was very good. He was very relaxed. These guys are masters at disguising who they are. But I felt Kalugin, now that he was trying to become an American citizen, had grown up with American ways, going to Colombia, being undercover that whole time. He really was sold on America as opposed to, you know, being a Russian citizen. And normally when you use non-actors, you have to take a lot of precautions. But Kalugin fit right in, and he was himself, whereas Colby always seemed a little out of sorts with being a public persona.
There are several reasons people betray their country. Fellow team members, keep in mind that where this mole is concerned, nobody. It seems ProCat can be run from anywhere in the world by anyone who's got his computer.
I feel that he, felt that he had served his country in his way for so many years, and that he wanted to try to, do something or be noticed maybe now after doing it clandestinely for so long. That's the feeling I got. But he wasn't a gregarious, demonstrative person. He was somebody who you could see kept a lot inside. He was a perfect CIA guy because he would disappear. He was a guy who could disappear in a room.
He would be right here looking at you very sincerely, and he would be a million miles away. He's drinking you in, he gets you. Pretty easy study. Not that you're an easy study, but he would probably perceive you as an easy study, and he would work it that way. He's just listening to you. He wants to learn about you and about the world. And so there was inner turmoil, perhaps, but I've never seen anybody hide it as well as he did. He hid it so well, he seemed to be milquetoast.
Colby's views on government secrecy softened after leaving the agency. He was politically active, supporting defense cuts and nuclear arms control, and wrote 2 books about his professional life in the CIA. And then he starred in Spycraft.
At first I was like, oh, game, Jesus, because I felt like he hadn't settled.
Killing Blake was a dumb thing to do. Without his knowledge, we're still in the dark.
It just seems a little odd. But then I realized he was very much independent, and he was kind of turning his nose up, or flipping the bird in a sense, at official Washington and what other people do. I think he felt liberated by it, that it was fun, it was irreverent, which he'd never really been. Official Washington was an orthodoxy, it was unorthodox, it was a game.
Colby and Kalugin's involvement with Spycraft is odd, but it wasn't a coincidence. Their casting was a clever ploy to convey that this game was different from the others. It had to be, because the company that made it needed a hit, one that would get it out of bankruptcy. In 1983, the video game industry had collapsed. In Japan, it was referred to as the Atari Shock. Model after model of Atari home consoles were marketed to consumers, accompanied by a glut of low-quality games. Consumers couldn't figure out what was good and what was crap. Finally, they just stopped buying. Some companies emerged unscathed by employing strict quality control. Nintendo would brand its games with a seal of quality to assure people that they were buying the good stuff. But Activision, an American game company based out of California, had put all its eggs in the Atari basket. developing exclusively for the company's consoles. The console crash sent Activision into a death spiral. A contract to distribute games made by the developer Cyan Worlds fell apart, just in time for Cyan Worlds to create Myst, the puzzler that would go on to become the decade's best-selling PC game. By 1991, Activision was $60 million in debt.
If we had a product by late October, we could sell it for the after-Christmas market.
Then Robert Kotick, a college dropout and aspiring tech CEO, bought the company for $500,000. If the 1980s has been doomed for Activision, then maybe the 1990s could be its chance at a comeback in the growing market of PC games. And so the company bet big on Spycraft, a blockbuster game for a new era. It was expensive, $3 million. It sprawled across several discs with branching storylines and multiple endings. And of course, it had real-world espionage bona fides, courtesy of Colby and Kalugin. It was one of the huge creative investments intended to get Activision back in the green. What it did instead was provide a blueprint for the future of the games industry in the decades to come.
The idea, when it was laid out to me, I went, oh my God, there's 67 practical sets. There's 40 principal actors, a combination of 35mm film, stills, digital matte paintings, video news clips, 2,500 motion graphics. It was a big challenge.
Ken Barris was already experienced with interactives when he was brought onto Spycraft. He directed a tie-in for the film Blown Away, starring Jeff Bridges and Tommy Lee Jones, and shot footage for an odd pair of FMVs where the player could edit together music videos for Marky Mark and INXS. But Spycraft was bigger than any interactive, or any film, that he'd shot before. A typical film script is 120 pages. Spycraft's script, from author and espionage expert James Adams, was 400 pages long.
There would probably be 4 to 5 versions of each scene. I'm thinking, I don't know how we can get through this 40 days of shooting for a 400-page script.
A confrontation with Kirk Waller's assassin character, Grendel, could go several ways. The player could be caught and killed. They could go in guns blazing instead. They could impersonate an arms dealer and use a code extracted from an enemy spy, but that code could be wrong. Or it could be right. Depending on their choices, the player would see only one version, but Barris had to film them all.
You're looking at puzzle pieces stringed together to make little pathways here and there, but you're never going to see your entire composite at one time.
It was the first video game I had ever done, or maybe the second, and it was just so confusing because I was this matches that. It was like this Rubik's Cube of material, and I just decided to stick with what I knew, to personalize that and bring that to life as much as I possibly could. They're taking care of the story. I don't have to worry about the story. I just have to bring humanity to whatever it is I'm doing.
Other 90s FMV games use video in limited ways. In Return to Zurich and Thanatopia, actors are totally stationary, collaged into their digital sets. In Night Trap, the player sees real actors on physical sets, but the conceit is that they're watching the characters through static hidden cameras. The movement in Spycraft cinematography made it stand out, and made it hard for computers to handle.
I had my little 1 megabyte graphics card on my desktop PC, and I would play those clips, and it just felt so magical to me that I could watch something in nearly full screen. I mean, it wasn't because my poor little graphics card couldn't do 640 by 480.
Yeah, you always think back to the opening shot of the movie The Player, the Robert Altman film, and they actually was shot on the lot where I had an office, so my office is in that shot. But I remember watching that and saying, this would be a great opening, the invitation to a player, a gamer, someone who says, you're being inducted, this is your first time walking into the CIA, into Langley. So we wanted that long, long tracking shot. We wanted to take you all the way down and over to the elevator where you're met by the actor James Karen. Again, we were working with the fact that it had to not hit too many rights and lefts and striations, or we couldn't do it. But I think it came off pretty good.
It's during this opening shot that one of Spycraft's conceits is revealed. The camera isn't just guiding us into Langley. The camera is you, the player.
But take this. It should be interesting reading. Things have not changed as much here as everyone thinks.
Actors, they're trained from day one that you don't look at the camera. We had to say, now, when you're looking at the camera, you're looking at the lead in the film.
No, that was the weirdest part of that job for me. So here I am, classically trained. Here I am working with Sanford Meisner, and Sanford Meisner is all about working off of your behavior and being present, seen as a living and breathing thing. And here I get hired to do this role, and I'm looking at nothing.
3 flights up, first door on the left. Your tools run at the floorboard. You'll be a hit with Brooks. I'll be outside when you're done. Make it fast, I won't wait long.
It was the weirdest thing. I think I started asking, can I look at a tennis ball? And they wouldn't let me. To overcome the self-consciousness factor, because not only are you looking into the lens, but that damn thing, you can see yourself in it.
I think the really good actors could commit to the fact that the camera is the character, and I'm going to speak to them as if it's Paul Newman.
The Langley set was built at Hollywood Center Studios, alongside a recreation of Red Square, the game's biggest and most complex set. Barris and a small crew went to Moscow to scout the location.
We just tried to act as touristy as we could, and shooting plates is not as big a deal as shooting live action. So you can actually act like you're just making a home movie. But I think we were followed the whole time. Yeah, Red Square will always be one of my favorite scenes because the fact that we had to create it, condense it, make it work for us, really feel proud about that.
Every single puzzle, every single decision that the player is forced to make is taken from events right out of Colby and Kalugin's careers.
They are representing the spy community at a moment when they themselves have ceased to really be its members. So they fully have become props for the creators of Spycraft, right? They are just like husks. And they're just there to be like figureheads. And I thought that was so bizarre and interesting.
A lot of the games that heavily used multimedia, it felt like you were an observer and not a participant. Whereas in this game with Spycraft, what I thought was really powerful, especially at that time, was that I felt like I was a participant and I was actually like part of the game.
The game itself is so turbulent and it contains so many events and there's so much drama and tension and so many potentially groundbreaking events are like poised to occur.
The narrative in Spycraft deals with nuclear weapons and political assassinations, but the minute-to-minute gameplay is glorified paperwork, cross-referencing documents, navigating CIA org charts, or comparing plane routes. Spycraft's great achievement was to make that fun by introducing tools inspired by the gadgets of secret agents, both real and imagined.
My name is Andrew Hammond, and I'm the historian and curator here at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Throughout the whole history of espionage, people have used tools. So it can be a way to conceal information, it can be a listening device.
And here is the clandestine listening device.
From cameras that would be attached to a pigeon to try to gather intelligence, to toolkits that you would hide in, let's just say, personal cavities or areas where you wouldn't be searched.
This is a new gadget from S&T. Very sexy.
Quite often, reality is actually much more wacky and interesting than fiction.
Oleg Kalugin and William Colby allegedly signed off on the spy devices and techniques used in the game.
They're supposed to be guaranteeing the authenticity of Spycraft. Like their presence is what makes this like a really like deep dive into actual spy lore and craft. And yet the specific people they chose are not actually like doing that work anymore. And moreover, they've become really skeptical of the CIA and the KGB, or like even just like the idea of spying.
But an interesting thing I'll always remember is that one day on a break, and we were asking Colby that exact question about how realistic are these things. Now again, mind you, this is in mid-90s. And he said, we've got satellites that can see if you're an innie or an outie.
Hell, you can even see if they're an innie or an outie.
And we looked at that and said, oh my God, we're being watched.
There was an intelligence component to it. You know, there were some aspects where you could shoot a gun and whatnot, but this was not a first-person shooter. It required some thought. Like the Kennedy assassination one, where you figured out the trajectory of the bullet, that was mind-blowing to me.
In this puzzle, the player uses the fictional Kennedy assassination tool to investigate the assassination of a Russian presidential candidate. The trajectory analysis gadget helps the player identify where the fatal bullet was fired from.
I mean, I think this brings up a bigger question about popular culture and espionage.
The tool seems to be named as a tongue-in-cheek reference to the investigation conducted into Kennedy's death. The location of the shooter and the number of shots fired were critical to establishing Lee Harvey Oswald's guilt. The argument over the veracity of this information has sparked many conspiracy theories, including ones that implicate the CIA in Kennedy's death. A 2012 Gallup poll showed that 8 in 10 Americans still believe that Kennedy's death was part of a conspiracy. The game's implication that the CIA would possess a so-called Kennedy assassination tool plays into these popular but unfounded theories.
I think that you could say, you know, we could apply this tool to look at the Kennedy assassination, but to call it the Kennedy assassination tool and then to put it in this game when you're trying to connect it up to the experience of Colby and Kalugin is maybe doesn't sit as well with me. I guess I'm just saying that for many people that come to these things, they're not necessarily parsing through each scenario and thinking, well, what did the authors of the game actually mean here? They may take 2 and 2 and come to 6.
It's congruent with things like Mission Impossible in the sense that there's a lot of granular focus on gadgets and, like, as the name of the game would suggest, spycraft itself. Like, what does it mean to be a spy? What does it mean to decode secret? Like, there's a lot of attention to that type of detail. It is maybe at the cost of attention to like broader questions of the type that, by the way, would have really concerned Colby and Kalugin.
Activision really impressed me with the fact that they wanted to do, as I said before, an amoral universe. They wanted to depict spy making as what it is, which is a gray area and it can be debated for a long time.
What we tried to do in Spycraft, and I think we've been successful, is create all the cool gadgetry and tension of a Tom Clancy novel, all the richness and texture of a John le Carre novel, but with one big difference. You are a CIA operative in this game.
In The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, John le Carre's bleak Cold War spy novel, le Carre writes, "Intelligence work has one moral law. It is justified by results." As the communist operative Fiedler explains in Martin Ritt's 1965 film adaptation.
Look, your job and mine permit us to take human life. If I want to kill you, and I can only do it by putting a bomb in a restaurant, and that's the way I'll kill you. That's what I'll do. Innocent people die every day. They might as well do so for a reason.
This reckless moral ambivalence, with real human cost, is at the center of espionage.
The most prominent place where that comes up is with the torture of the North Korean operative.
In this scene, the player has captured a North Korean spy in the CIA's Moscow safe house. The player needs information from her, how a high-tech weapon was stolen from the CIA. One method employs the game's playful approach to gadgetry. The player uses a rudimentary cousin of Photoshop to doctor a picture so her boyfriend looks like he's in custody. They can make it look authentic by adding key details like his preferred brand of cigarettes. Or the player can torture her.
She's just there in this weird KGB dungeon that just like happens to be fully equipped with like a working torture device. Why it's there, how it's there, why they're allowed to use it at all for their own purposes is never explained. I think that it's very amusing that the torture takes place in Moscow on equipment that is not owned by the United States. right? It's taking place in the epicenter of power for our former Cold War nemesis with their stuff. Like, that's so weird.
If the player accidentally kills the operative without extracting information, Thorn is thrown into jail. Intelligence work is justified by the results.
So the torture takes place, but it's in this gray zone of acceptability in an odd manner. So the question is raised, but only in a kind of theoretical form.
Players who found the idea of torture too intense could disable the sequence entirely when starting the game.
It doesn't ask the bigger questions like, should we be spying on other nations? What is an acceptable level of torturing people in terms of deriving information from them? That doesn't come up, and maybe it's not structurally possible for it to come up because the game is about the enjoyment of being a spy, right? It's about the joy of discovery, solving puzzles, and playing with cool toys. It's not about thinking about sort of like the philosophy of international politics.
In a nod towards Le Carré's work and the gloom of the spy genre, none of Spycraft's multiple endings are clear-cut victories.
Basically, if you want the most optimal outcome the game can offer, which is that the good guy wins the Russian presidency and the American president isn't assassinated, then you have to kill your friend, basically.
As the player navigates Spycraft's branching storylines and multiple endings, the information they work with isn't perfect. Characters will give objectives that others disagree with. Clues will turn out to be red herrings, leading the player down dead ends. If the game has a particular point of view, it's one that values information above all else, which is its own moral prerogative.
There's a lot of pleasure that the player is supposed to take in checking off these boxes, like solving the puzzle or getting the information or whatever, and then that completely overshadows any potential question about why we're doing any of this stuff. And it also privileges the individual.
Real spy work always has a human cost. That's how someone could recognize Kalugin on set that day, back in 1995, and shout,
"That man killed my father!" And there was almost a rumbling. People started realizing who Kalugin was, and there was a rush in the crowd to come forward, and only because I think we had some pretty buff grips and electrical people that we were able to hold back, and we had some policemen on the set too. They held it back till they calmed it down, but it was unnerving.
The player's goal is to make heads or tails out of who's good, who's bad, what's going on in this world.
Even though it employs two of the Cold War's most notorious figures as set dressing, Spycraft is emphatically a post-Cold War narrative with an American point of view. The anxieties and hopes it depicts and its portrayal of the world are all firmly rooted in an optimistic early 90s view of US-Russian relations.
After the end of the Cold War, then all bets are really off. There's no longer this threat of brinksmanship that breaks down and ends in a nuclear event. But on the other hand, there are a lot of, I guess, more unpredictable factors and more volatility.
We're not going to refight the Cold War with the dastardly Russians and the heroic Americans or any of that stuff. We're going to work as to how we, now in this new world, can cooperate against common problems.
Spycraft is really smart about this because what it does is describe it in terms of a game. My name is Justin McElroy, and I am a full motion video aficionado. It's called Spycraft the Great Game. And I think that it doesn't lean too hard on patriotism. It's not let's go get the Ruskies. It's seeing this as a game where people are making moves, and this is the thing they're doing to counteract this move. And he's thinking one step ahead, and he has this tool that he's using to beat us. But they are seeing it as a game.
Spycraft, in the end, is not a game about Russia. The Russians are kind of props in it, or they're plot elements. It's a game about United States world supremacy, basically, right? The continued dominance of the United States, and it's created from the position of what would be optimal in terms of maintaining US interests abroad, in particular in Russia, our erstwhile foe. The idea is that like now, Russia now has this opportunity to build its market economy from scratch, and when it does so under the benevolent tutelage of the United States, then it will become a democratic nation, and then it can really be like friends with America for real. Like it can join the cool kids. So I think that, to me, that is a really important piece of the story.
Spycraft depicts an event that real-life Americans were genuinely concerned about. A landmark presidential election in Russia that would swing the country further towards liberal democracy or back to communism.
Most political observers believe that he is actually running neck and neck with his communist challenger Gennady Zyuganov.
1996 is a confusing moment. It's the year of Yeltsin's re-election campaign. So instantly I was like, what a coincidence. How interesting that this game happened to be released in this arch-important year in post-Soviet history. Yeltsin is extremely unpopular and seemingly decrepit, and it's not totally clear what will happen to so-called Russian democracy if he fails to be re-elected. And on the other hand, Bill Clinton is supposed to be getting re-elected, hopefully, maybe. Hopefully, I guess, for him. But in February '96, when the game is released, like neither of those things has come to pass yet. It's an inflection point historically on both Russia and the United States. In the United States, around Yeltsin's possible not re-election, I think there's a great deal of panic. I think the Clinton administration would have greatly preferred for Yeltsin to get re-elected because obviously the United States has a lot invested in these like end of history narratives.
The end of history is a philosophical theory developed by Francis Fukuyama and first published in 1989. Fukuyama argues that ideology-based societies, such as communist ones, will cease to exist, giving way to the dominance of liberal democracy. In the essay, he writes, "What we are witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War or a passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such, that is, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government."
And obviously this idea is wrong and bad, but it's understandable why it became so popular, right? This is becoming maybe the central tension of the 90s, that like now everything is cool, history has ended, the Cold War has been won by the good guys, the United States, and so everything is stable. But on the other hand, there is a lot of turbulence and volatility, and nowhere more so than in the 90s in Russia, which experienced like just crisis after crisis after crisis, and the evacuation of all kind of like previous ideological constructs so that there's a sense of real, I don't know, like the ground really moving beneath your feet.
The future of Russia is the most important foreign policy problem we face.
It captures a particular moment between the end of the Cold War and 9/11, when these two superpowers that have faced off against each other, how are they going to relate to each other now? What's their dynamic going to be? And there was optimism, there was hope that maybe, they could be partners, they could work together more.
Spycraft came out in February 1996 to critical acclaim. An adventure that openly invites comparisons with the works of Tom Clancy and John le Carré, writes Computer Gaming World. While Coming Soon magazine boasts that Spycraft could well be the beginning of a roaring comeback by Activision. And Colby and Kalugin's participation gave the game unprecedented levels of authenticity, according to Mac Gamer.
Without getting too far into hyperbole, I think Spycraft is the greatest FMV game of its era. What did Spycraft do that is brilliant and obvious? One, good actors. They got actual good actors to play the parts in the game.
It's a cornucopia of some of the greatest character actors of all time. I think of Charles Napier, Alan Coleman, James Karen, Dennis Lipscomb. They were just great pros. They were fantastic.
But they didn't get such big actors that they would give you half a performance like they were slumming it. Like you see this from Christopher Walken in Ripper.
Well, please, I'm dying of anticipation.
Right? He is half there. He's barely there.
How's the coffee, Sarge? Nice and hot.
There's shots where it seems like he's like at the craft services table and just sort of shouting his lines over to the camera. These people are in the roles, they are inhabiting them, they are leaning into it too. Production wise, like, it looks really good.
It's got lots of different sets and everything with high production value. We built Langley and we built Red Square.
And then the third thing that I think is actually like the secret sauce of Spycraft, and maybe where it succeeds where other games that didn't script on production values failed. Spycraft is really smart about mechanics that aren't separate from the full motion video thing.
I can't think of any other game of that era that had that type of story that was so well done and well thought out, that also had these really fun and inventive puzzles, had multiple endings, had kind of a really smart use of technology.
The DOS instructions run to 14 pages. Disabling Smart Drive, changing your config.sys, and auto-exec DirectX video drivers are required. Requires 16-bit color. Some players may experience troubles with the system requirements.
I missed Spycraft the first time around because I didn't have a fat rig to play it on.
Despite the huge budget, positive reviews, and Hollywood pedigree, Spycraft wasn't a blockbuster. It was quite literally too advanced for its time. The ability to play real video in a computer game was sensational, but compression muddied the quality. Compact disc held considerably more data than floppy disk, but Spycraft required 3 CDs, which players frequently needed to swap between.
It's also, I think, suffers from the fact that it was so late in the cycle of FMV games that I think a lot of people already made their minds up about them.
You had a lot of really terrible experiences with full motion video games where the game was as much kind of watching its footage as it was anything else. But at the time, that still felt revolutionary. And so I think that was really the landscape that something like Spycraft entered into in 96.
If you don't know that Spycraft succeeds, you can look at a lot of games that look kind of like Spycraft and you're like, yeah, this is going to be another one of those.
Almost simultaneous with Spycraft's release, the FMV format crashed. Full motion video was expensive and looked archaic next to the 3D graphics of Sony and Nintendo's new consoles, the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. Director Ken Barris had 3 interactives come out in 1996. After that, the well dried up, and he returned to directing films. Today, he's working on Carmageddon, a pilot for a show where fast reflex gamers are at the forefront of nuclear conflict.
Looking back on it, it's just too bad the world didn't get to see what a limited segment of the world saw.
In the years since Spycraft was released, everything that made it unique in 1996 has become commonplace. Moral choices form the backbone of what we consider mature game storytelling. Branching, choose-your-own-adventure narratives are seen as part and parcel of player empowerment. The use of real people for motion capture, and more recently, the use of film actors like Giancarlo Esposito and Keanu Reeves, further blurs the line between AAA games and Hollywood. Spycraft did all of this in 1996, but the future didn't come soon enough for Spycraft. Two months after Spycraft's release, on the evening of April 27, 1996, William Colby went on a solo canoeing trip on the Wicomico River near his vacation home in Maryland. According to the New York Times, Colby was a frequent boater and was deeply familiar with the area's waterways. But this time, he did not come home. Colby's disappearance made international news, igniting conspiracies across the political spectrum. Colby was hated by some for the devastation under his watch in Southeast Asia, and by others for exposing the CIA's family jewels. In Lost Crusader, The Secret Wars of CIA Director William Colby, author John Prados writes about the rumors that circulated when Colby went missing.
Few American spies vanish, and quite certainly no director of the Central Intelligence Agency had ever faded into thin air. The incident brought out resentment some CIA officers had harbored for Colby since the 1970s, Indeed, there was corridor gossip at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, that the director himself might secretly be an enemy agent, the long-suspected and sought Russian penetration agent, or mole, allegedly planted within the CIA during its early years.
But after a week-long search involving local fishermen and Navy personnel, Colby's body was found on the banks of the river. An autopsy determined that he had likely suffered a stroke or heart attack and drowned.
And I was in shock, as much as everybody else, and I just know that for a guy who lived a stealth life that long to come out in the open and get so much press, worldwide press, it certainly would add to the conspiracy theories that were going around.
What is significant is that such suspicions were entertained at all. They were based not on notions of how an enemy had gained advantage from a spy, but rather some sense that the Central Intelligence Agency, US intelligence, or the United States as a whole had been damaged by Bill Colby's actions as Director of Central Intelligence.
What I don't buy is that there was some conspiracy theory to kill him and it was a long elaborate thing with a boat planted and he falls out of the boat. No, you don't put him on a boat and lose a paddle and push him down this way and depend on this happening over here and this. No, it's too complicated. I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I made the film The Man Nobody Knew about my dad, who actually most people didn't know of. And they don't know who my mother is, and they didn't know who I was. So why am I making a movie about a family that nobody knows? What am I going to learn from that? But then I thought, he had a very unusual growing up, and my father did, and so did I, being the son of a CIA master agent and paramilitary operator. And I thought there might be some truth in what I can speak about, and I can understand him more, and did I really know him, or am I just pretending? I lived in a world that doesn't exist anymore. And I thought I could bring back some of that world and show people how some of us are formed and created by the world they lived in.
Colby's untimely death shocked me. We had planned to meet at his country home on the Chesapeake Bay in a week or so. I lost a friend whom I deeply respected and trusted.
I was getting calls from all the news services that just had done pieces on Spycraft saying, well, when was the last time you saw him? What was he like? And I had to say, I really don't know. I don't know anything about this.
I got some footage of when the game first came out, or it was archival, but it was German television footage. They came to me, I think, and they said, we found this, your father doing an interview about the game. And I said, really? Not in German, he doesn't speak German. And I watched it, and it was interesting. He pointed things out about the game and was quite enthused about it and selling the game quite well.
I was still recuperating from the project itself, and then all of a sudden to go from a few weeks earlier doing all the press about the release of the game to, oh my God, Colby is gone now, the guy we just worked with. It was a shock.
But before the official interview began, the tape was rolling, and someone asked him kind of a softball question. One of the German technicians, I think, said, how does it feel to have been the CIA man and now you're out, or whatever? And he said, to hell with the past. My father said, to hell with the past. In almost a biting, mean-spirited, wrongfully injured sense. And I thought, wow, that's a really dark, that's a cynical thing to say. Who cares about the past? The hell with the past. And then I thought, well, maybe family-wise, he's moved on.
William Colby's death and the circumstances around it have divided his surviving family. Not all agree with the conclusions that his son Carl Colby arrives at in the documentary about his father's life and legacy.
But also before he died, another call, I said, oh, by the way, I heard your old friend Judge whatever, your college roommate in Princeton, he was found under a bridge in Middlebury, Vermont. He had advanced Alzheimer's. He spent the night under a bridge. Police found him. He was alive, but he goes, oh, That'll never happen to me. I said, really? He goes, yep. One day you'll hear that I was walking on a path on a Greek island and I fell to the sea. I said, really? He goes, yep, just like that. What does that tell you? I'm not living according to your schedule. It's time to go.
Oleg Kalugin was settling into what would be his new permanent life in the United States, the ex-spy turned businessman and professor. He published his biography, originally titled The First Directorate, in 1994.
92 to 90, maybe the mid-late 90s is it's like the perfect time to be talking trash about the former Soviet Union in the Anglo-American West, right? It's like exactly what everybody wants to hear and when everybody wants to hear it.
The late 90s saw the rise of Kalugin's old KGB colleague, Vladimir Putin, from advising St. Petersburg's mayor to longtime dictator of Russia.
Kalugin, he's been calling Putin a war criminal since the early 2000s. So that, it's not like he just showed up yesterday. He has been on the outs with his own government since the late 80s.
In 2002, Putin had Kalugin prosecuted for treason, ostensibly because the ex-major general had testified in the US trial of George Trofimov, whom Kalugin acknowledged as a Soviet spy. Kalugin maintains that he only confirmed information the United States government already knew. He never thought of himself as a defector or a traitor, and called the charges an act of political vengeance. At Kalugin's own trial, held in absentia in Moscow, he was represented by a lawyer who never spoke to him. He was found guilty of collaborating with the United States and was sentenced to 15 years in prison, which he will likely never serve.
Let's talk about Vladimir Putin here. I'm joined by Oleg Kalugin,
former chief of KGB foreign intelligence operations.
Thank you so much for joining us, Oleg.
In the years since, Kalugin has criticized Putin from afar, becoming a regular on TV programs hungry for an authentically KGB perspective on current events in Russia.
He knows which side his bread is buttered on, and he's going to make maybe this is the most cynical way of looking at it, but he's clearly angling to be the former Soviet spy who now is telling all about the truth about the KGB that they don't want you to know.
Now a naturalized US citizen, Kalugin continues to live a private life near Washington, D.C. We reached out to speak with him for this project, but he didn't respond. In 1996, Spycraft stood apart from other FMVs, with its sprawling story, cinematic video, and intelligent puzzle design. Today, game developers are powering an FMV resurgence, but these new games are forging their own creative identity, telling intimate stories on indie budgets. Instead, Spycraft feels like a precursor to today's big-budget AAA games, a product of its time and an interpretation of it. Spycraft was intended to be a blockbuster in its own right. Instead, it laid the foundations for Activision's actual blockbuster, the Call of Duty franchise.
There's an element of construction of reality itself that is happening in Spycraft. It's not just representation, it's there's a feedback loop somehow, which is why it was so interesting for me to then learn about Call of Duty and the way that is also clearly in a dialectical relationship with reality itself.
First published in 2003, Call of Duty is a series of war simulators that depicts conflicts ranging from World War II to modern-day nuclear warfare and back again. Like Spycraft, the Call of Duty series cannibalizes real conflicts, becoming a feedback loop. It embraces not only Hollywood actors, but controversial military figures like Oliver North as advertising props, even placing you alongside them in-game. It has glossy production values that embroil players in bombastic historical set pieces from a first-person perspective, and a globe-trotting, politically aware storyline that references current events. With 2007's Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, Activision Blizzard began exploring a fictionalized, explosive conflict between the United States and Russia. And much like Spycraft, the player's character is asked whether or not they want to bend the established rules of conflict. Spycraft asks you to consider whether doing bad could be necessary to yield good results, Mistakes are punished with game overs. In Call of Duty, there are no branching narratives, and doing bad is not a choice. When modern warfare makes you torture a captured terrorist suspect for information, it's depicted as pragmatism, a reflection of the United States' changing philosophy during the so-called War on Terror. The early 90s optimism that fueled Spycraft is a relic of the past. Colby is dead, and Kalugin is retired, but the structures that they upheld and briefly opposed are still in place. Video games still treat realism as a kind of currency, chasing Hollywood and military approval to assert their authenticity and gravitas. Spycraft itself ends on a tease for a sequel that will never come. But the future it built is the one we live in.